Hello, and welcome to Oxomalian Media Network. I'm your host, Yersalem Goodmai, and today with me we have special guest, Brother Douglas. Welcome, Brother Douglas.
Thanks. Thank you very much.
And can you please introduce yourself and explain your connection to Tigray for those unfamiliar with you?
Okay, well, my name is Brother Douglas, and yes, I started going to Ethiopia. Specifically, the very first time I went to Ethiopia, I traveled very immediately the next morning to Tigray, to Mekelle, and that was almost 19 years ago. So July 2003 was my first time to go there. And at the time, I was a chaplain of a homeless shelter in the inner city where I live. And through that ministry, you meet ministers from all walks of faith who have a desire to minister to the homeless, to the hungry, to the hurting. And through all those introductions, I met people who were making short-term mission trips to the region of Tigray and working with local colleges. And so I began to pray for the people of Tigray, not really knowing much about Tigray or Tagaru people. It was a really interesting time because not long after I began to pray, I was permitted to attend a meeting about another short-term mission trip. And I was a candidate for being included on that trip. And so to me, it was an answer to prayer to be able to go to a place that I'd been praying for. As a minister, you pray for people groups all over the world. And so this particular people group, the Tagaru people, had been in my prayers. And so July 2003, I flew into Mekelle Airport, and that began a different chapter of my life. So that's how I'm connected to Tigray. Now, I didn't just make that trip. I made two other trips in 2004, and one of those was an extended trip. And during that extended trip, I met a young lady who would eventually be my wife. And her name is Meseret, and we've been married for over 15 years. We have two children who were born there in Tigray. And so for the last 15, almost 16 years, I served in Tigray. I lived there. We lived there. And we worked in the gospel ministry. We did a lot of Bible distribution. We did a lot of work with childcare organizations. We also worked with people who were on the street. I traveled all over Tigray, promoting the audio Bible and the audio Bible stories for those in the countryside. It was a great time. I really enjoyed my life there. In fact, it characterizes a lot of who I am today, because I can say that a third of my whole life was spent in the region of Tigray.
Okay, that's great to hear. And I know that you said that your time in Tigray, which was pretty extensive, characterized who you are as a person. In what capacity do you feel like you've left a mark on Tigray as well, and what continues to draw you to the Tagaru people?
Well, most of my friends for my mature adulthood are in Tigray. My wife's family is a large family. Not only her immediate family, but her relatives. We're all very, very close. Many of the churches and the people that we met there, we have deep relationships with. I visited over 16 different cities and towns in the region of Tigray, traveled extensively through Tigray, meeting different people, hearing people's stories, trying to minister to them in various ways. And, it's my children were born there. My son, who's 8 years old, he was learning there in the local language before the schools closed down because of COVID. We've met so many different people there from all over the world as well. I held an English language Bible study in my home for several years. And many of the expats or foreign nationals who came from abroad, from all over the world, from all different continents, they had nowhere to go where there would be an English Bible study and prayer service. And they would often come to my home. And we met people from all over the world through that ministry as well. We have people who love us and care for us. And most of the time I'm trying to reestablish contact with people there for the sake of finding out their welfare, finding out their state of mind, and how we can, if in any way possible, assist them at this critical time.
I think it's safe to say that that's your second home, and as much as you're helping the people of Tigray, they are similarly helping you and develop who you are and your family unit. So that's quite beautiful to see. I'd kind of like to shift focus to what's most pressing in Tigray currently. You were in Tigray when the conflict first broke out. Can you describe the days leading up to the war? And was there a sense of uneasiness in Tigray?
The days leading up to the war, yes. In fact, just a few months leading up to the war, there was increased talk, increased rhetoric about conflict, possibility of war. I had recently visited the capital city, Addis Ababa, because I was going there to renew my driver's license. And while I was there, I was speaking to some friends there who are involved in the church ministry. And of course, they have their comments on the news and they have their own views as well. And I was really, I think, more informed about what was really happening. I mean, it started about 2018, of course, as you know, even a little bit prior to that. Really, about 2018, the rhetoric began to increase. But yeah, right up the days right up before the war, I began receiving emails about the movement of troops, the movement of forces, not only the ENDF and the some Amhara militias, but also the EDF, the Eritrean Defense Force. There was word about their movement to the border. So you're talking about the southern border, western, eastern border of Tigray, and also the northern border of Tigray, multiple places. There was reports coming in about troop movements on all sides. And so that was a little bit alarming. We began to feel a little bit uneasy. You could sense it also on the street. There was a little more vigilance about people's attitude, people's countenance, the way they addressed certain things and talked about current events related to what was coming through the media. So the days leading up to the war, we knew that something was going to happen. We weren't exactly sure. Longer than I have lived in Tigray, there was peace. There was an enjoyment of peace, obviously, and every time you celebrate Lekatit Asartahada or Gembot Isra, you're celebrate. There's great celebration. I mean, the previous generation is still enjoying the fruits of their labors. And it's very important up there to recognize those particular days. So we enjoyed peace, and there was no thought really, that something this dramatic, this catastrophic was going to befall us there.
You mentioned that there was rhetoric that started to come up in 2018, and this is shortly after Abiy Ahmed assumed his premiership. Can you elaborate a little bit more about what kind of rhetoric you heard towards Tigrayans specifically?
Well, it a lot of it was coming through translation, obviously, because I don't have much on the Amharic language, just some functional Amharic. But the friends of mine who were viewing the news and they were just serious individuals who were telling me that something is coming if those guys up north don't change or turn themselves in. Really something's going to happen. And I was warned that you need to be careful up there. You don't know what kind of dangerous people are up there moving around. And I'd lived up there for quite a while by that point. And so it was news. It was really, it was surprising to me to see that someone would think that it was really dangerous for a foreigner to live in Tigray, because I'd lived there, walked there on the streets. I didn't have a car for most of the time that I was there. I used our family used the public transportation. And only since 2018 did we have a car. So we moved everywhere by foot or by public transportation. And normally, a law-abiding citizen doesn't move around after certain hours at night. So, I mean, when we were moving around, there was nothing for us to be afraid of. There was nothing. I mean, we sensed nothing but peace and brotherhood and just a serene environment where we lived and everywhere we went. Knowing Tigray, it was a surprise to me to hear what people had to say about the character, what they thought of the character of the place. But the rhetoric that I heard was about what was going to happen, that there's possibility of military activity. So that was as far back as 2018. Something could happen, and so.
And when you heard phrases like "Oh, be careful, there's dangerous people up north," did you think those kind of phrases were specifically geared towards government officials, or did you think it was talking about the actual civilian population of Tigray?
I wasn't sure, to tell you the truth, but even I've spoken about it with a diaspora friend of mine who was from Australia, and he and I had the same conversation. I mean, we experienced the same things, and we expressed them to one another in our conversation. That when he would travel to different parts of Ethiopia, when I would travel to the capital, we were asked, "What's it like up there? How are the people?" And you need to be careful. And we both were amused at that kind of talk, because it showed really the misinformation that had been basically given to most people about Tigray. And Tigray is a very fraternal region of the country, where there's a lot of solidarity in thought and in philosophy, in religion, in family life, and all aspects of their existence. So, like I said, it was surprising to me.
And so the way that you've described Tigray, despite talks of conflict brewing, it seemed like it was relatively peaceful. Now, after the war was officially declared on November 4th, can you describe what you witnessed in Mekelle, Tigray's capital, particularly in the first couple of weeks after the war was officially declared?
Right, we heard the first shots of the conflict, and of course, we were unaware of the details, just in our home. And we later learned, in response to all the troop movements that were amassing around the borders, and that were accumulating not only on the north with Eritrea, but on the south and west with the Amhara and Afar borders. We learned that it was a preemptive strike, and so we knew that something we didn't know at that time what was going on, but we learned the next day. I mean, it was on the radio the next day that there was a strike, and that immediately forces from the ENDF and the Amhara militias, Fano, were entering the Tigray region. It was not as if they had, they had to prepare, and then maybe a week later they were arriving. they were all ready to make a strike. And so, but those were there was some sustained artillery. That's what we heard at November 3rd, late at night, of course. In the time zone there in the Horn of Africa. The very next day, there were airstrikes, and there were fighter jets that were flying over the city. And we learned later that it was not just our city, but it was other cities. And we saw those. We saw the fighter jets fly over. We saw when the bombs were dropped, and they seemed to be falling randomly. And of course, that time of year, it's very windy. For non-precision guided weapons, it's going to be difficult for them to, hit, a target. We don't even know if they were trying to hit a target, but we don't even know if they're capable of calculating very well to hit a target or not with what they started with. But those particular airstrikes just fell randomly and hit certain areas that were civilian areas. They didn't hit anything that was, it was inside the city. So the days after that, there were continued airstrikes. So we either heard them in the night, or we heard them during the daytime. Often we would see them just outside, walking outside, going to complete some business at the shop or something. We'd see them. We saw them from the roof of a friend's home while we were having coffee together after lunch. We heard the sonic boom. We went up, and then we saw the bombs drop. And of course, my son was crying. He didn't know what was going on. He saw that. Of course, he was 7 years old. No, 6 years old. So he was. It was difficult for him to see that. Of course, it imposed a certain amount of uncertainty on all of us. Immediately, there were lots of expats because, as I told you, we knew a lot of the expat community, from all over the world. So there were Asians who were coming to our home, Bangladeshis, South Koreans. There were Indian professors who were coming to our home. Many people were coming to our home to find out if we had any news, because from the night of November 3rd, when those first artillery gunfire was commenced, the power was out, the internet was out, so we had no communication from that point on. Only those who had a generator. There was a couple of hotels nearby our house, and they had generators, and so we were able to get some news about what was going on. And then, of course, we realized the campaign against Tigray had already started because it was already being televised. So,
and I was going to say, with the telecommunications blackout, it was very difficult to understand what was happening not only outside of Ma'ala, but in other areas of Tigray. And you mentioned a scene where there's airstrikes being conducted, where it doesn't seem like they're being precise for particular military targets, and it's seemingly hitting the citizens and civilian infrastructure at random. At what point did you realize what is happening is not a normal conflict or a law and order operation, as the government of Ethiopia like to declare it, but something much more sinister?
Well, obviously, it was when I knew it was not going to be something that was short-lived. It was going to be prolonged. It was going to be something quite different from what we had been experiencing up there during the peacetime. The kind of gunfire that we heard, first of all, let us know that there was sustained gunfire, different kinds of gunfire. Obviously, it was not just one guard signaling to another guard, as sometimes that would happen with night security. So that was the first thing. But when the bombs were being dropped by fighter jets on random targets in civilian locations, that told me that this was something completely different. This was not the law enforcement operation, and it was never a law enforcement operation. That was a way, that was a way of sugarcoating, kind of a diplomatic way of speaking to win the approval of the people, to win the approval of the international community for these things. From the very beginning, this was an attempt to do something in Tigray that had been discussed, obviously, over a longer period of time between the government of Eritrea and the government of Ethiopia.
Notably, after the peace deal that came between the two countries, and after Abiy Ahmed received the Nobel Peace Prize for it, which details of such peace deal have never come out. So are there any particular images or stories amongst the airstrikes, or with either diaspora or Tigrayan civilians living there, that you can particularly recall that stuck with you?
Absolutely. Of course, the aftermath of the dropping of the bombs, and of course the smoke filling the sky, and then people kind of running here and there, trying to get to where they were going. Then the day before the ENDF entered into the city of Ma'ala, we were busy trying to get some more information. So every day we were out on foot. I was out on foot around the city, trying to meet with different people, trying to meet with the directors of different organizations such as WFP, UNICEF, ICRC. Since we know a lot of people, we were able to talk to some and get connected pretty quickly to some of the heads and try to find out some information. And at one point, as we were waiting, for one personnel, we were sitting at a cafe near the ICRC, and one of my friends, who's a driver for the Red Cross, said, "Hey, it's time to go. There's some shelling that's beginning. We have to get you back to your house." And so I was rushed pretty quickly, and then of course we heard the shelling began. The shelling of Ma'ala. So it was, that was alarming. That sticks with my whole family. That sticks with my son. For the next few days, the city was shelled, and it was very, very loud. I never heard anything like that before. It's very hard to describe, but everything's shaking, and the shelling is nonstop. So we were near the cemento stairwell, and we were somewhere near it, trying to be in a place where we could be sheltered just in case something hit. Places around the north and northeast side of the city were being shelled the most. Around the Ideta Referral Hospital, around the Adaha and Adashim Dahun area, there was a lot of shelling on that side, around even as far as Lachi, of course. That area was getting a lot, around the Mesabo cement factory. And so that was constant. We didn't know, how long that was going to last. We were simply near the stairwell as a family. We were praying, asking for God's mercy. At the same time, staying in touch with some of the neighbors and trying to find out, what was happening. But there was a lot of people prior to that, especially expats, who were seeking evacuation. And just before the shelling started, of course, evacuations were postponed indefinitely because of the troop movement and the shelling that was going on, the shelling that was about to happen. So,
and you were eventually able to evacuate, correct? And what did that process look like?
Well, let me finish one thing. Okay. I received a phone call from a friend of mine from the Ida Referral Hospital and there were wounded people who were pouring into the referral hospital. There were several people who were wounded. There were several people who were killed. One of the neighbors of my friend, they were killed. In my wife's family's neighborhood, there was a guy who was cut in half by a shell. So the just as a testimony to what was said about there were no casualties in the taking of Makala, that was a lie. The truth is that there were many casualties. Several people were hurt. Many people died. So can you restate the question?
Yeah, you mentioned that there was a process of evacuation for a lot of the people that you knew, and can you talk about like the process of you being able to leave the country, and was that what kind of process was that like? Was it difficult? I know there was a telecommunications blackout. A lot of people were afraid to even move anywhere. So if you could just describe that.
Right. Well, I mean, as I said, we know a lot of the expat community that was there, and a lot of them were coming to us. And because we do own a car there, we were people were asking us to take us to the UNICEF and WFP offices, which were just across the street from one another. So I was busy at first doing that, and I didn't think that we would leave. I was hoping that this situation would come to a head where the parties involved would eventually talk to each other, and that very soon, maybe life would get back to some kind of new normal. Obviously, it wasn't going to be that. It's not that. But we postponed it, and there was a struggle within me as a man of faith, wanting to remain there. And also in conflict with the fact that as a father and a husband, I'm required to be a good shepherd to my family, just as the heart of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ is very shepherdly and kind and takes care of his own. So that was a struggle within me for a long time. So the power was out when the ENDF, the federal troops, took control of Makala. They went from house to house searching. They searched many people's houses, every house, and ours was entered as well. But from that point on, there were lots of troop movements around the city. Of course, there's no power, and there was a curfew imposed from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. If you were caught outside after 6 p.m., you were shot on sight. There was no questions asked. There were people in our neighborhood who were shot. It was a great outcry in our neighborhood. The bodies were just left on the streets all night long, and just subject to the elements, to wild animals, to stray dogs, whatever. The bodies were just left out there on the streets. So when you're lying in the bed at night, we were there for 40 days, almost 40 days, as the war proceeded, and then the federal army took over, and then the occupation. We were there. So every night, by 5 o'clock, you're making sure the family's safe inside the walls of the compound, and then you go to sleep in the evening. But as you're going to sleep, you can't sleep very well, because you're hearing the gunshots ring out throughout the night of people who are being eliminated by the military presence for breaking curfew. But we didn't know, are they really breaking curfew? Are people's houses being entered and they're being shot, or are they just shooting people who are out on the streets? We had no idea. So there was a big struggle, and of course, finally made the decision that if we're going to leave, we need to consult with family, find out from my father-in-law the best way to move. And of course, my father-in-law is a retired UNICEF chauffeur, And so he has golden advice, very helpful counsel, and we did our best. We bought benzene on the black market, and we moved out from Allah. We went through at least 10 military checkpoints between Ma'ala and Alamata. And the way between Ma'ala and Quiha and after Quiha was really unrecognizable. It was unrecognizable due to the movement of military hardware, obviously tanks and other kinds of military hardware that had moved. Roads were destroyed. You had to go on different roads. You had to go on like just out in the dirt, out in the field, because the roads were messed up. Between military checkpoints, of course, we passed at least 20 to 25 burnt out battle tanks. Me and my son counted about 20. Several areas of the road that were damaged extensively due to artillery fire. And at each military checkpoint, of course, usually we were asked to get out, show our passports. My father-in-law did the talking, and they wanted to go through our stuff, search our things. So that was a lengthy process. So what's normally a shorter journey took us 3 whole days to get to Addis Ababa. So.
And then following what you've seen, which was, I think, meant to inflict both physical and mental trauma of the people of Tigray, you made the decision to go back in July 2021 to Ethiopia, particularly stationing in Addis Ababa. What was the general sentiment you felt from people of Addis Ababa towards the conflict in general and towards Tigray and Tigrayans? What were they perceiving? What kind of information were they getting? Because of the telecommunications blackout largely, obviously one side was mostly shown rather than the Tigrayan perspective. So what did you witness?
Right. So we came to the U.S. January 2021. We thought initially to take a rest, to recuperate. And then, my wife has always, been one to abide by the laws of the land. And so, especially with her U.S. visa, when 6 months expires, she's, we're right back in the line at the airport, ready to go. And so we were going to go back and, try to relocate in Addis Ababa to minister to Tagaru peoples, to Eritrean refugees, because we also, learned a lot about Eritrean refugees while in Tigray, learned about the refugee camps, had friends among them. And that's a very greatly impacted community because of the war as well, because they had come to and found their home. They'd come to and found their home in Tigray in peace. So we thought we can be used of the Almighty to really help and minister to and encourage not only Tagaru but Eritrean refugees there in the capital city, and to serve in any way possible. So that was the reason that we went. We went on faith, and we spent 4.5 months there. And of course, the situation was almost unchanged, static, as far as the general situation in the Amhara region and Addis Ababa were concerned till the end of June, obviously, when the TDF made a great push to take back Ma'ala and to take back Tigray, and then they moved into the Amhara region. So we actually entered Ethiopia when the situation became fluid again. So that was we were not planning to go back at a time like that, but we thought, well, it's kind of static. Maybe we can manage and really try to minister to people. God knows He can lead us, and so we stayed there, and Generally, you know, as we as I mentioned before, there were several businesses that belonged to Tagaru people that were closed. I learned that uh, by I think September or October, up to 40,000 Ethiopian, and I may be wrong, but I had learned that up to 40,000 Tagaru owned businesses had been closed. And I actually experienced, I actually saw that, a shop that I had visited and that I liked going to. I went there one day. I wanted to get a few things, and it was closed. Taashiguneru. It was just, they had the tape on there, and I stepped back, and I began to chat with a few people about the situation and ask what was going on. And of course, the emergency situation had already been imposed, and so there was a sentiment around Addis Ababa, of protecting Addis Ababa, of keeping it for Ethiopia, make sure that we band together and we protect it. That was kind of a sentiment that was really going around, and you could see it on the television as well. The television stations, they were training local people for becoming a kind of a local militia for Addis Ababa. I think up to 30,000 people had joined that. But we realized, and we knew from news that we were getting, that the TDF was approaching Addis Ababa. They had made it to Desse and Kombolcha, and so there was a lot of movement. A lot of people were with the suggestions of their embassies. They were trying to move out of the country, and we also knew Tagaru who were trying to leave the country, who were stopped from leaving the country. They were stopped at the airport. Some were in prison. We knew people who went to prison. Actually bailed a friend of mine out of prison. And I also have an Eritrean friend, and because he was speaking Tigrinya, he was arrested. And he's Eritrean, but he's actually he was born in the Amhara region, and he lived in Eritrea, and then he came back after escaping Eritrea. He was in prison for a long time for his faith in Eritrea, and he was arrested simply for speaking Tigrinya, and he also had to pay. He had to pay to be released. But
was that something you were fearful of? Just because you've mentioned the business closures, there was also a mass arrest campaign. Simply speaking Tigrinya, and which is the primary language spoken in Tigray, resulted in arrest. Were you scared, having a Tigrayan wife and children, that they could be swept up, and seeing your friends who you were close to being mass arrested and essentially bribed to having to pay large sums of fees to get out? Was that something that was on top of your mind?
Yes, I thought, well, as far as money's concerned, that really makes me a target. And the worst case scenario is that my wife and the children are separated from one another. The youngest, our little girl, Noami, is still breastfeeding. So at that time, that was a concern of mine, and also knowing what had been done to the women and girls of Tigray already during the occupation of Tigray by the ENDF and the Fano and the EDF. That was a big concern of mine. I didn't want anything to happen to my beloved wife. I didn't want anything to happen to my children's minds about her being taken away. We knew some of the Tagaru who were living in our area, and they were also in touch with my wife, and saying, hey, the police have come to our house, and we could look out the window from our apartment complex. We were seeing police going from apartment to apartment, and looking for Tagaru people, and they were that was 2 weeks up until two and a half weeks up until the time that we left in late November or mid-November. We noticed that there were police who were moving around, and if I was out taking care of some business, sometimes my wife would call me and say, "Hey, come back quick," because they're going through the apartments again. So yes, it was a big concern. We were witnesses of people being of apartments being searched, and sometimes at night, when we were coming back to the house from somewhere, there were checkpoints just near to where we lived, and IDs were being checked. So we weren't sure, is that to take people away, or is that, what are they, what's going on? We were just moving, trying to get home. So it's definitely a concern for us. The worst case scenarios passed through my mind. Of course, I'm supposed to prepare for those kinds of things, and it was one of the reasons for deciding to come back to the United States.
Okay. And I know because of the widespread persecution and the atrocities committed in Tigray and against Tigrayan people throughout the country, there's been a kind of a new sense of identity that Tigrayans are finding themselves having to come up with in the greater context of their Ethiopian identity. And as a man of faith, I'm curious as to what your thoughts are, particularly about the Tigray Orthodox Church deciding to disconnect from the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, and the Tigray Islamic Affairs Supreme Council disconnecting also from the Ethiopian Islamic Affairs Supreme Council.
Well, yes, I've done a few courses in church history, and those are quite helpful for, I think anybody who wants to know why we are where we are in the stream of history, especially as pertains to Christianity or religion. So I did see that story. I saw the story, but prior to that, there were interviews of clergy already that had been going on, not just of the Orthodox Church, but of say the Makani Jesus Church. There was also the Tigray Evangelical Churches Association that came together and did an interview on Tigray TV and wanted to explain what was going on and to be, to testify to the facts on the ground, which I really appreciated from them. But obviously, as we know, there's a large demographic among the Orthodox and evangelicals and Muslim communities who are supporting the wholesale, without question, the activities of the Prosperity Party and of the Prime Minister and of the military campaign that went on. And they believe whatever is coming on the mainstream media, and they are, for the most part, silent or not outspoken enough or not clear enough. Maybe that's because of fear on some people's parts. Maybe because, as I said, they support these activities. They think that, as it's been presented, it's some kind of law enforcement operation, which it's far from it. But understanding a bit about church history and, the way that churches have divided sometimes over either theological issues or ideological issues or issues of praxis, it's not a big surprise to me. I almost saw it coming, and I also heard, some of the things coming out of the Orthodox Tewahedo Church in Tigray that were of note due to the violence. They have and they sense a great duty to speak up for the people that they represent, because they understand their role in the society, and they have great compassion for their parishioners, and they want the best for them. And they also feel the the effects of the genocide, and some of the clergy obviously have been those who have lost loved ones. Many were slain in the Aksum massacre. So a lot has happened, which has basically been, analogically speaking, or proverbially speaking, the burning of a bridge between Tigray and the other regions of Ethiopia, which in some cases it's very sad, but in other ways it's understandable, because it's their way of making a stand and saying, this is not the propaganda of some radical terrorist group, and we're all just in on it together. This is our stand on the fact that we're not being heard. There is a genocide going on. The children, the infants are starving. The mothers are starving. The food stores were burned. The fields were burned. The animals were killed. Our youth were slain in the streets. Our churches were attacked. The most revered site in Ethiopia, in the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, the St. Mary of Zion Church, was attacked and desecrated, and people slain there for no other reason than they were there at the church. They were found at the church. So, and of course, a lot more was happening all around the church in the city as well. So they have the duty to take a stand somehow. How do they do that? How do they take a stand as the representatives of their people, as those who sense a great responsibility to shepherd the souls of their parishioners? How do they take a stand? Whether you're talking about the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, or the Islamic religion in Tigray, they have a duty to stand for those that are suffering all around them. So it's not surprising to me, understanding church history and understanding the situation. It is sad because it reveals the depth and the gravity of this catastrophe that has befallen the people, and that is felt all over. It appears quite necessary at this point in history. Now, of course, as we know, churches can reconcile. Dioceses of the church can come back together. That was something that was lauded, that the Prime Minister was lauded for when a previous patriarch of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church was brought back to Ethiopia, and there was a kind of reconciliation, a kind of unity fostered and initiated by the Prime Minister, and people enjoyed that. So those kinds of things may happen in the future, but at this point, they have a responsibility.
That makes perfect sense. And I'd like to just end it with two more questions. And that is, do you believe, based on your firsthand, what you've witnessed firsthand and what you've heard from either your friends, family members, and members of the Tigrayan community, what is being done in Tigray and against Tigrayans constitutes a genocide? And why do you think the international community has remained largely inactive, considering the severity of the conflict and its implications on the millions of people?
Yes, most definitely. What we're seeing happen to the people of Tigray does constitute a genocide. It did constitute a genocide, a long time ago already, when the region was occupied by the ENDF, the EDF, and the Fano, the Amharic militias, and other related forces that enjoined on the invasion of Tigray. Thousands of women were raped, and there was an attempt at segenation. And segenation is when a large group of the the females of a society are impregnated for the purpose of watering down the bloodline. There was also not only the rape and the miscegenation, but torture was involved. Unspeakable things. And then we know youth that attended our Bible studies in one of the orphanages that we ministered to for several years. Individuals who had grown up, who were eyewitnesses to the mass murders in Hausen. In Hausen, more than one time, several youth, sometimes 40, sometimes 20 or so, at one time were gathered in the square, and they were gunned down in front of everybody. So the displacement, the forced displacement of the murders of people in Western Tigray, and forcing the people to move, or killing the men and making the women and the children run. All of that, of course, is genocide. It was genocide already. And then when the blockade was imposed, and of course it was already kind of happening by default because of the military invasion and the reach of some of the supply, the reach and the limited extent of some of the supplies. The genocide was already kind of going on. The blockade was kind of already going on, but the blockade itself cuts off food and medicine to a region of Ethiopia that is arid, that has a limited water supply, that has a very fragile ecosystem as far as the ability of those in the agrarian areas to produce enough food for themselves and for their communities. Is very fragile, and that has been affected. So everything that's been said about a ceasefire to allow the farmers to plant their seeds and so on, it's just a lot of talk. It means nothing. That's just a big lie. Crops were burned, fields were burned, seed stores were burned. The preventing food and aid and medicine to go into the region because you say you just only want to get 2 or 3 score people in your law enforcement operation. You want to get a certain group of people that it's not more than 100. It's just a group of guys that you say they have to come to justice. To do all this for that, of course, it's big time overkill. There's no way that anybody with a thinking mind believes that it's a law enforcement operation. It's a genocide. You're trying to starve the people out, just like Mengistu Haile Mariam tried to starve the people of Tigray out. So it's a genocide. They're starving people to death. And of course, people who have a need for medicines for their diabetes, or for kidney situations, people who were heart patients and who required special care. All those clinics have no equipment. They have no medicines. Even what has recently been shipped to Ma'ala, we thank God for that, but it's a very small amount. It doesn't do anything to remove the threat of mortality of the population.
And given these circumstances, because the people of Tigray are being subjected to a siege, which is blocking their access to food they so desperately need, with millions in dire need of food, and also blocking people from getting the medical access that they need, and because 80%, or there's been a complete collapse of Tigray's health structures. So many people are dying of preventable diseases and lack of medicine. Why do you think the international community has been so inactive? What more should be done?
it could be that the international community, being as divided as it is, I mean, you have Russia and China on one side, and then you have the Western powers on the other side, so that effectively you get nothing done really fast, which is what we see. I mean, Yemen has been having a problem with hunger for a while, and of course, Myanmar has some big issues. There's Ukraine and Russia going on right now. I don't know. Maybe they feel that they have bigger fish to fry. I'm not sure of the reason. I'm not a big political person. I'm a layman, in respect to the thinkers, to the political analysts. But international community, of course, especially in the U.S., is moved by the political concern of the population. I mean, when something is to become a concern of congressmen and senators, people have to call their congressmen and their senators and say, "This is what we want. This is what we want." There's a lot of desensitization that has happened to Western societies. Sadly, it's the truth that there's so much happening all over the world. There's so much happening, not only locally, but there's so much happening all over the world as a whole that I think a lot of times people don't know which one is the most important cause to undertake. A lot of people don't know that even though the war between Ukraine and Russia, or what's brewing between NATO and Russia, could be something. It could be something. It's still not anything right now. The largest conventional war of our time period is the war that's going on in Tigray, and the largest catastrophe, the largest human toll that has been taken because of this is of course, in Ethiopia, and especially in Tigray. So the media, of course, in Ethiopia, the movement of diaspora from Ethiopia all over the world, their take on it, the way that they're presenting it, poses a challenge. Although, really, it's easy to see through that. It's easy to see who is becoming the political partners of Ethiopia. Countries that are not so high on the list of maintaining human rights in their own countries, among their own people, such as China, Iran, those who've been providing drones to Ethiopia. I mean, what do they do to the constituents in their societies? What do they do to the people who are under their governance? So these are now the allies and the ones who are voicing that they back the Ethiopian government's decisions. International community, as far as the UN, I'm not sure. I don't know why it's taking them so long. Maybe they feel they can't do anything without it really being some kind of military intervention. And I really don't know what constitutes, the red line for Western powers to get involved. Obviously, being militarily involved in this day and age has the backlash of being categorized or labeled as neocolonization or something like that. And I don't know what they would be afraid of by being involved militarily. I don't know what that would involve. I know that security is a major concern for Western powers, U.S. military, trying not to make the situation worse than it is. Like, it could become a lot worse. Sometimes when the militaries get involved, things become a lot worse for a lot longer period of time for different groups of people. And I think that they've made big blunders across the world, and they know that. They've spent gobs of billions of dollars and accomplished very little. But I also have the big question mark, in my mind, about what does it take for us to see that something, is a a major injustice. The major injustice of our time period is, basically the strangulation of an entire people group, the starving of an entire people group, and nobody is really doing enough about it. It's sickening to me. And I've talked to a representative of our state, of our state's Congress, our state's congressman, talked with him at length and let him know my own anecdotes, my firsthand account, my firsthand witness of the situation, of what's going on, and really said we need to do something. Something has to be done more than is being done right now. The diplomacy, as the president of Tigray, Dr. Debretsion, said, is lip service. It's nothing more than lip service at this point. There's a nod to what's going on as yes, it's a genocide. Yes, it's humanitarian crisis. Yes, they need aid, but nothing more is being done. And I'm not sure if there's something in the works that's going to happen. We don't know what all that would entail, or what the results of any kind of different approach to the situation would end up being. Again, I'm a layman as far as these kinds of things are concerned, but I know something needs to be done soon. Something needs to be done immediately.
Very valid points. Immediate assistance and intervention cannot be understated, given the severity of what's happening and the number of people impacted. I thank you, Brother Douglas, for sharing your testimony and providing your firsthand accounts. This is very important as part of the broader picture, painting the broader picture, and documenting what's happening in the context of the ongoing Tigray genocide. And I also want to thank the viewers who engaged with us on Facebook and YouTube. I encourage everyone to follow and subscribe to Oxamawian Media Network on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook to keep abreast of what's happening, not only in the context of the Tigray genocide, but to just be aware about what's happening, anything related to Tigray, whether that's culture, religion, language, whatever have you. Thank you again, Brother Douglas.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me on. I hope I've in some way been helpful, and may it add to the consensus of impact, and may God save Tigray.
Thank you. And I was just going to say, we all look forward to a day when Tigray is free from conflict and genocide, and hopefully to be able to welcome all Tigrayans back.
Yes, I look forward to that day as well.
Thank you.